We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
So we are here today with Beks Dagogo-Jack, the former chairman of the Nigerian Presidential Task Force on Power. Beks, welcome to the Energy Impact Podcast.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you. I've read so much about you, so pleased to meet you.
Well, it's an honor to meet you as well. Maybe you can start off by just introducing us to, growing up in Nigeria and the power situation there and how you became involved in both energy and politics.
Okay, thank you. Long story. I don't know how many minutes you'll give me on that story, but I'll try my best. Growing up in Nigeria, when we grew up, I was born over 62 years ago, so I've been around for a while. So growing up, when we grew up, was a mix of blessings. We didn't have the kind of modernization we have today, but we had some kind of strong traditional overlay as to what was proper and what was not proper. And that foundation was critical in defining what our life trajectory was going to be. The values we're associated with, the ambitions that we put in our mind to seek, and all that. So Nigeria back then is not technically as developed as it is today, but culturally it was by far richer, more organized, more purposeful than it is today. I graduated in civil engineering, not power engineering as most people would guess, and started my life in a consultancy setup where we dealt mostly with structural engineering projects.
What kind of what did you work on?
I worked critically on high-rise buildings, 7 stories and above, mostly dealing with the steel integrity, the reinforcement integrity of those projects, so that you can be sure from foundation right up, you are given a guarantee of 25 years at the minimum as a warranty for your design. I was also involved in a lot of highway projects, linking urban and peri-urban cities. So a lot of earth fill, we use more of earth rather than concrete for our roads. So do a lot of earth fill, a lot of compacting, a lot of waiting for the proper dry density before you overlay with asphalt. Otherwise, with 1 or 2 rainfall, the thing packs up like a pack of cards. So I did a lot of that. I did a lot of housing as well. Yeah, I said from the consultancy, I moved on to join the downstream petroleum sector, again as an engineer. I work with Total, the French company called Total, and mostly involved in network development, retail outlet, construction, planning, and what have you.
And what is network development? What type of infrastructure does that support?
Basically, the downstream petroleum sector took care of selling finished products in retail outlets. So your AGO, your petrol, your gas, in some cases, your natural gas, your kerosene. So, and because of the terrain in the district in which I operated, which was heavily waterlogged, the foundation of the retail outlets was more critical than even the superstructure. Because if you get the foundation wrong, you can't put a tank there. The tank will be filled with water because you get water 3 meters below ground. You have to deal with serious water presence.
Wow.
So our engineering was to protect the tanks that will be buried so they don't get waterlogged water infiltrated, mess up the product quality, get rusted very quickly. And then to also have a superstructure that was fine to look at, competitive for vehicle users to drive through. So, but it's a long process from land acquisition, appraisal, and then design of the project, then delivery of the project. So it was very exciting. It is from there I got poached, and I got poached frequently after that to work in the public sector.
Okay. And what is that like? What is the difference in terms of the cultural significance of working in the public sector versus the private sector?
Ooh, almost like light and day, if you ask me, especially in our own context. Why do I say so? In our context, and I've compared a lot of jurisdictions coming to this conclusion. In our context, the difference between private sector and public sector in many developed economies cannot be put down to hard plus and minus dollar issues. Are you with me?
Yes.
Whereas here, it was not just that you can't put it down to dollar issues, but it's clear to you that the public sector was a drain pipe. It's just draining revenue.
Wow.
And the private sector was a profit-driven agenda. So they don't look alike.
Yeah.
In the US, for instance, you can bring a public sector project and see that it is marginally less efficient if it was done by a private sector. You can see the margin right there.
And why is that? Why was there such a stark difference, though, in your country?
It comes from a long history of struggling to develop the right institutions, struggling to establish the right quality of leadership, transparency. It's just how you evolve over time from ground zero going up. Yeah. And some of it is excusable against the background of evolution as a society. Some of it is not excusable because enough time has happened for some of those corrections to take place, and they haven't taken place.
And when you joined the public sector, were you trying to reform that? Were you trying to change the way things were done to make it more efficient?
Yeah, my first encounter there was as a special aide to the Minister of Aviation. And at that time, we had only one national carrier, Nigeria Airways. You either get a ticket there or you wait forever to get your next ticket just to make a local trip. And when you get your ticket, you'll be surprised you are one of 5 people that were given a ticket for just one seat. So you have to hurry into the airplane and take your seat. Otherwise, there'll be 4 seats contesting that seat. Oh. So, and as a young man, I said, no, this is not going to happen on my watch. So we put a lot of pressure on the system. I was not the minister. I was not in a cabinet. But because we are strong on ideas, we pressurized, and that sector was liberalized. We licensed about 5 new airline operators, indigenous and joint venture operators. And pretty much everybody could determine when they wanted to fly, and there was no stampede at the airport. I get some sense of satisfaction from that experience.
Amazing. What an amazing victory. Okay, so now you have this win under your belt. You realize not only was I good at the private sector work, but I'm good at the public sector work too. What was the next challenge you decided to take on?
Yeah, all along, because I started off as a consulting engineer, I had a strong passion to build a practice around that, which I can call my own. So I established Jack Reynolds Engineering, which is a firm with capacity to do a lot of engineering work, either in collaboration with other experts or on our own, leading the pack as a professional leader, yes. And we got licensed by the normal authorities that license engineers for that kind of practice. I'm a fellow of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, which is the apex professional body. Now, but as soon as I settled to work in my firm, another public sector agenda comes calling. So I was called to serve in the cabinet of my state as the commissioner for public works, transport and housing. Yes. So that took me up the table again. I felt that engineering consultancy is personality driven. So for as long as I'm not around to manage the office, I shut the office down.
Yeah.
Technically, I put it in the cooler. Because if somebody else was running the practice and had some wrong judgment down the stretch, it's my name that will be.
Yeah, it would have reflected poorly on you. Yeah.
So I ended up becoming a commissioner for works in Rivers State for a couple of years, where we also had a lot of infrastructure challenges that we dealt with, especially in terms of roads.
Yeah.
We did a lot of because Rivers State is the southernmost part of Nigeria, with a lot of water bodies. That's also where all the oil is, pretty much all the oil is. So it has the Niger Delta area. So it has a peculiar terrain. So anybody who is in charge of public works is forever struggling with the weather. We have about 7 months of rainfall. So if you don't plan your projects well, your project is rained out. You can't even go to site. A lot of calculations that need to be done in the budget implementation phase.
So now you were a public works commissioner at a local state, and then where did that lead to?
I did that for a bit. They added a few shades of it. I was in transportation, I was in housing, I was in public works and all that. I did that for a bit and went back to Jack Reynolds, hoping to dust off my clients and tell them I'm back to work. And then the power sector came calling.
Okay, so I want to hear about this. Yeah, the power sector.
Yeah. So I was called, I was invited to join the team, the Presidential Task Force on Power, as a team lead for the National Integrated Power Projects. Now, this was a special purpose project.
Tell me, what was the origin of this project? What drove it to become what it was?
Yeah, it was just something that had to happen under a very strong political leadership. It was Obasanjo who was the president at the time, and he realized that unless he did something out of the ordinary, our power situation will never get a leapfrog to any other threshold from where we were. Yeah. So he took some money from the federal revenue. We had a boost from crude oil sales. We benchmarked, say, crude oil sales for $40, and we ended up selling for $100. So he says he's going to take the 60 in between and inject into a special project that will deliver electricity for Nigerians. That's how the National Integrated Power Project came about.
Okay, so tell me, what year was this, and what did the power infrastructure look like before and after this project?
Good question. The year in which he started the process was 2005. It was very methodical. In 2005, he put together what we call the Electricity Power Sector Reform Act. It's a national, it's a law of the land which passed through the National Assembly, passed through Congress. Now, that laid out the roadmap for moving the sector away from government monopoly to private sector operation. So having set that up, sometime in 2006, he put together the NIPP, which I had already described the purpose behind it to you. Now, at that time, our total available energy on grid, which is what we're talking about really, on grid power, was probably in the order of 4 gigawatts for the whole country. Wow. But of the 4 gigawatts, what was available that can come down to consumption level was about 1,000 megawatts, 1,200 or 1.2 gigawatts.
Where did the rest go?
The rest is what you would call the fact that there was no efficient handshake from generation to transmission to distribution. So there was a lot of dysfunction. Yeah. So generation is on 3.2, but the efficiency of the generation is at 50%. So you have 1.6 coming out of there. And transmission can only yield another 80% of that. And when it gets to the distribution corridor, they don't even have enough distribution infrastructure at the disco level and distribution level to take up even all of what has been delivered to them. So this mismatch between capacities and handshakes was what eventually was a major problem. And all of that was possible. Why, Brett? Because the person who owned and operated the generators is the man who owned and operated the transmission, is the one who owned the natural gas, which is the feedstock, is the one who is the distribution company. Just one company, a monopoly, vertically integrated, running all of this show and running it terribly.
And so there was no market pressure to make the system more efficient because it was a monopoly.
Exactly. Now you got it. So the law that was enacted in 2005 was meant to unbundle the monopoly, let them stand alone as company entities, and evaluate them and sell them to people who can manage it using private sector models. And that was what the Presidential Task Force was set up for.
Okay.
So I moved on from being a team leader for the project to deliver the 400 projects, which moved us, like you said, you were asking what was the delta, what was the change?
Yeah.
So we were able to migrate at the end of that exercise in 2014. We were able to increase generation to 10,000 plus megawatts. That's time 2.5.
Yes. 2.5
times what we saw. We're able to move on-grid available and transmitted energy to about 5,500 megawatts, 5.5 gig from 1.2. So a lot of progress was made in that timeline.
And this is also during a period of rapid population growth in the country as well. So the demand is there, right?
Super. Even with all we have done, we were barely around the 30% electricity penetration level at urban, if you are looking at urban supply.
Wow.
And rural supply is even way less than that.
And so what are the impacts that this has on the overall economy, not being able to deliver enough power across to the users that need it?
Your guess is as good as mine, but let me put it in context, kind of play with numbers a little bit. First, behind all of this is a very solid demand consumption-driven population of almost 200 million people.
Yeah.
So
unbelievable.
Market cannot ignore a market. I mean, investment cannot ignore market. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
So you saw a lot of investment chasing this market, but doing so at a cost profile that is way higher than the cost profile anywhere else in the world. So we are self-generating. We're self-generating 3 times what we're receiving on the grid. And self-generation is almost 4 times more expensive than grid power. So to that extent, you see that.
And when you say self-generation, what do you mean exactly? Do you mean like people setting up diesel generators for their businesses?
Correct. A lot of this used to be 90% of that was diesel. Down the line, people started flirting with natural gas when the gas network came closer to their backyard. They were able to switch to natural gas. People are not really so much into solar for self-generation because of many reasons about footprints and what have you. So solar has not been that effective.
Yeah. So, okay, so you left us off in 2014. What has happened to the country since then? What does the generation look like, and what are some of the major goals of infrastructure development now?
Yeah, with respect to electricity, it's been not too good a news to tell, more because when I left in 2014, but we left with a very clear concept of how the progress should be sustained. And the concept was that government should still nurture the reform process to a scale in the market where it can run on its own. Yeah. And government was given the powers to do that. I'll give you a simple example. We have 11 distribution companies with their jurisdictions. Now, some of those jurisdictions were too unwieldy. Some of them cover three, four, five states of the federation. Now, you can imagine how efficient they will be, considering that they even have, some of them have zero experience in electricity business when they won the bid, because they coupled with an expert from the US or India or somewhere. So we respected that joint venture and gave them the companies.
Yeah.
But we know that it needed much more than just picking the companies to make those companies work. So we prepared that in 2 years or 3 years' time, we'll ask each of them to account through forensic audit.
Yeah.
And we'll say to Disco 1, your jurisdiction is too wide for you. So we're dividing it by 4. You keep 1, the other 3 will be given to other players.
Yes.
And you get some kind of compensation for grandfather rights, but you cannot manage the asset because it's unwieldy for you.
Yeah.
Now, this component of readdressing, unbundling the market as we go along was overlooked. It wasn't done. So most of the discourse got buried under the weight of the inefficiency. The market is doing less than 30% revenue on energy supplied. How do you sustain a business like that?
So, yeah, okay. So, yeah, how do you fix it? What are the solutions to making this a more efficient market?
No, the thing is, first and foremost, start from a premise that by taking government out of the business, we can't go back to that again. So that is good news for any investor.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
If there's a possibility for complete reversal to another government ownership, I won't advise even my enemy to come into that market. But we've been able to take that out of the equation.
Great.
So for as long as it's private sector driven and with government sensitivity to its own responsibilities, sooner or later, you'll get to the cruising speed and you really don't need government behind your back. All you need is a solid regulator who knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So we'll get there. We'll get there. Some of it has to do with leadership, has to do with how the government structure is resourced with persons more from politics than from the technical knowledge side of it. And those are realities that you have to deal with wherever you are in a political environment.
So tell me though, if it seems to me with 200, 300 million people, on the way, it's like, how do you? There's such a high demand for energy, like there has to be. So what is that seems to me like a business opportunity. If someone wants to come in to deliver power, how would they do that?
Thank you. A lot of people think the same way you're thinking. How could this problem become an opportunity, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, in that process, new thinking have been imagined over spending more policy engineering time on off-grid market development. So if you come to the market, to Nigeria now, you will see 2 markets parallel and both complementing themselves, not competing with themselves. And so if we have an off-grid market template that an investor can come in, just like the OTC in the stock business, you have the under the stock or over the counter trade, and then you have the normal New York Stock Exchange. So if we have 2 market formats in the country, one essentially for off-grid and has all the regulatory and institutional framework backing it, you will see an investor can come into that space with his own investment model without worrying about the on-grid complications, because the regulatory trajectory, the regulatory pathway for on-grid is totally different from the regulatory pathway for off-grid.
And when you say on-grid and off-grid, what do you mean in terms of the physical representation? Do you mean off-grid like someone could build a power plant next to a steel factory and just connect it there and that's off-grid? Or could someone build directly to a distribution company and that still be off-grid because it doesn't utilize the transmission network?
Super. You're correct on both counts.
Okay.
On the first count, we're talking about eligible customers. There are eligible customers whose demand in of itself is big enough to attract a single generating investment.
Yeah.
Scaled to the need of that person. That I will not call off-grid because it is already running in the context of the licenses that we have here.
Okay, so that's already, you can do that. If you have a steel plant, you can buy a generating asset, no problem.
Yeah, you can do that like yesterday. That's not a problem.
Okay.
The upgrade I was looking at is more to do with injection through the distribution network, you're right. But also, we have a license that is called Independent Electricity Distribution Network. If you're a network operator that has that category of license, it means that in the judgment of the regulator, there are segments of the society that cannot be well served in the foreseeable future by the distribution company. And they are not going to let them wait forever until service comes to them equitably from the distribution company. So they will carve them out of the jurisdiction and give it to you as an independent electricity network operator.
I see. You can set up your own microgrid, is what you're saying.
Essentially a microgrid. So you control the end-to-end of it. From when you generate it to when you collect the money is all your business. And the only thing the regulator will do is to ensure that both service delivery and tariff are in the right place.
And is that available now, or is that an idea for the future?
It's already embedded in the law and it's available. I think there is one or two people struggling to roll out the first of such project, but it is there.
It seems like a lot of work, though, setting up your own distribution. I mean, you have to lay wires, and that just seems very, very troubling. A lot harder than just, building a power plant somewhere and plugging it in, right?
Yeah, but when you get to realize that many of those communities already have the wires in place.
Ah, okay. And why is that? Yeah. How do they have the wires but not the power?
Yes, we have what we call Rural Electrification Agency that is as old as 50 years, if you like.
Yeah.
And sometimes under political pressure, they are made to move wires, supply lines into the communities of politically visible people and what have you. But it's one thing to do that, it's another thing to connect it right up to where the energy is.
Yeah.
So you don't expect a disco to use its gas power that it can sell up in an urban center and get prime value for it, and he pushes it up to a community that is 10 miles away, that he doesn't know when he's going to get his money. There is no meter there. Right. So for those reasons, those infrastructures have been lying waste, quote unquote. Yeah. So the man who gets this license will need to use that as his supply base, as his network base, as his wire base. And all of that will be built into the cost or the project cost process. But most of them already have wires.
I see. And wires just not being used.
No, wires is not the problem in most of the cases.
Yeah. And what is the demand? If you were to say, if you were trying to attract new energy sources to come to your country, what is the price that they would be able to sell energy at, and what is gigawatt demand for new energy?
New energy demand estimation would look like a joke, but I know if you dropped 40,000 megawatts or 40 gigawatts today, it will vanish into thin air if you do it the right way. So
as in, when you say that, you mean that people would buy it immediately?
Yeah, what I mean is that there is a waiting demand. There is suppressed demand that will rise up to that.
And for what price? For what price could people pay for that?
On pricing, I need you to context it from the dimension of value proposition. So the guy who needs power in order to be competitive in his business does not worry so much about the input cost of power, but is worried about his own ability to produce the size, the volume, to get his money back, because power is integral to the business.
Yeah.
So to a large component of the market, pricing is not the issue. It is only to the consumer component of the market and the low income components of the market that's where you begin to struggle for pricing.
Yes.
And it's exactly the same in the telecom industry. In Nigeria here, my steward at home has 2 telephone lines. He has to pay for it. If he doesn't pay for it, it won't work. So nobody is discussing pricing in telecoms because there is an intersection between need and price. Yes.
And
so it's the same thing.
Is there a market that, or is all of the legal infrastructure in place that would allow a generator to come? I mean, it just seems like 40 gigawatts, 40,000 megawatts is so much opportunity. And with the industrial customers, like you said, willing to pay for it, what is the barrier right now that stops energy companies from just showing up and building power plants and selling that power to these customers?
Exactly. The barriers are on different levels. Number one, the proof of concept that this thing is working very well is the best signal for new people to join into the space. So when we rolled out in 2014, we were having 75% revenue remittance from the distribution companies. 75, only 25% was technical and non-technical loss. That was a great incentive for anybody to come into the business.
Yeah.
But if you drop from there to 35% or 40%, people begin to wonder, am I going to get my money back? So it's the fear of the system not working well. If you're talking about captive projects where I produce power for a captive or an eligible customer who wants to stay away from the grid and be sure that he's permanently secure on energy, that market is there. But the reason why that market is also not growing fast is to the extent that most of those customers, the power developers, the project developers are asking for an arm and a leg. They want a lot of skin in the game. They probably want letters of credit to the tune of, say, 50% or 30% of the energy that they're going to build. They also want to backstop themselves so far as the risk is concerned. So the process of getting there, if you're a struggling company with all the other infrastructure handicaps we'll have here, where do you get that kind of capacity? So again, that is where the pushback is mostly.
And even in those markets, which you're right, seem like easier markets to sell into initially, where it's an industrial customer and they want the power off grid, so to speak. Is it just a financial risk? The developer is just afraid they're not going to get paid for power. Why can't they just then sell the power to somebody else? Why not put it in an industrial cluster, sell it to one customer, and if one customer stops paying, be like, okay, I'm going to sell it to your neighbor or your competitor.
You're also talking about how those industrial projects were laid out and whether they were laid out with a mind of this kind of pool, this kind of power pool. But if that is not the case, you're talking about another round of investments, just trying to bridge into another customer. And that's like complicating the matter right there. So, but I think that I have also not touched on the fact that the power project developers have not been incentivized to be creative enough. All of them are coming into the market with a template, with a particular mindset that they're going to be supply on-grid power, they're going to have a PPA from government, they're going to have sovereign guarantee, they're going to have this and have that. So that's the kind of template everybody is using. Yeah. So if you are countercultural, and if you come in through another route and you hit the ground running, nobody gets to catch up with you because you came into the market from a different intelligence.
Okay, so let me see if I can paraphrase so I fully understand what you're saying. You're saying there's a lot of opportunity there, but the power developers, they're thinking old-fashioned. They're thinking, I need this in place and this in place. all of these checks and guarantees. It needs to be 100% secure. But if you're willing to be creative and you're willing to say, no, I'll do a private deal and maybe it'll be with an international company, so I don't need the sovereign guarantee because the company has enough credit rating, then I can make it work and I can get a project underway. And then once I get one project underway, I can show the next guy and then just keep going, building and building from there. And it's because I didn't think, oh, I have to sign all the paperwork like they've always done with the government, that gives you the advantage to come in.
Super right. Super, you're spot on. More than that. By your third project, thereabout, you call all the shots because they've known that you can do it. You can get three of the banks, local banks, to give you the same backstop that nobody wanted to give you before. And before you even go to the drawing board, because they've seen it there, it's working. There is not a telltale.
The problem is that trust works both ways. And the developers right now don't have enough trust to get a project started, but also the local banks don't have enough trust that the developer will do what they say they're going to do. So if you're the first developer to come in and show at least a couple times that it works, now all of a sudden you have the other half of the trust equation and you can take advantage of that to scale moving forward.
Big time. Man, you are good.
No, you're good. You just told me that. Awesome. Okay, cool. So how can we, what do you think are the most promising opportunities then moving forward? Do you have a specific area of the country, a specific industry, a specific energy source in mind? Anything that you think would be a good way to kind of move this energy dilemma forward?
We do have a lot of those kinds of openings. On the industrial front, I see a lot of opportunities. Some of it needs to be mapped out in more detail, in-country assessment, not long spoon or long distance appraisal, but in-country assessment. I also know that we have a pattern of building clusters of housing units where you have loads and loads of houses in the same within the same fenced property. Those ones are low-hanging fruit, if you like. It depends on what kind of model you want to use to access it. But those are places in which you can get into the space and finish contracts without too much of government interplay. We have a lot of universities. Most of our universities are almost equivalent to peri-urban communities, mid-sized communities, because of how they are laid out. Infrastructure, homes, houses, hostels, university halls. Those ones are also ready captive markets. There is a government policy there that is even going to incentivize a developer. If he says, I want to provide alternative power for a university, you have an automatic access to certain incentives on the government side.
Okay.
There are teaching hospitals. Yeah, there are teaching hospitals, which normally, as you know, because of the surgeries and what have you, are 100% electricity dependent. Again, those can be captive markets to look at. There are some airports which are amenable to the same captive market option. But all of it is just embrace the market, get to know it a little bit, begin to design your way around it, and normally some things will begin to fall in place.
Amazing. Okay. And then if you were to, put on your, hat looking forward and say, here's what I want the future to look like in 5 or 10 years, paint that vision for me. Tell me what's possible for your country 5 or 10 years from now, if people act in the right way, if people, bring opportunities forward.
In doing that, let me underline, Brett, not too good at night dreaming. I dream with my eyes open, so I can tell myself when I'm being stupid. So in the context of projecting Nigeria into the future, I see a few real dimensions playing in. We have a lot of diasporan resource at the knowledge level, at the capital formation level, at the networking level, at the capacity to connect world markets to us. So all of that has remained potential so far as Nigeria is concerned. There is no diasporan deployment strategy or model that I can tell you is in operation in Nigeria. I see that almost getting to the tipping point of being released. So if that is released, it can put a lot of possibilities in the market space because they are able to vouch in the developed countries what Nigerians ordinarily do not have the mettle to vouch. They're able to take risks that the locals here cannot take. So if the diasporan energy is unloaded into the market space, I see things changing rapidly there, including in the political front, because there's a way the economy and the politics are all interlinked.
Yes.
And so if the quality of politicians, the quality of knowledge of politicians and their public service orientation shifts for the better, these two combinations can give birth to a Nigeria that is the envy of many, that I can tell you.
Amazing. We can't end on a better note than that. Beks, thank you so much for taking the time today. It was an honor to meet you and really appreciate you sharing your insight with the whole audience.
Thank you so much, Brett.
Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men and for the progress of all people.